In this presentation video, I'd like to take just a quick look at colour harmony and gradients. We can get creative with frames of all types, but we do have to be just a little careful. A frame or a border to an image is there to present and support the image and not to compete with it. The moment we make the frame more eye-catching than the image, well, then we've really lost the plot, as they say. With the opening of this image into Photoshop, we can use the basics of the map border technique, which we looked at in a previous video, and maybe just take it one stage further, adding a little colour and harmony and using a gradient. Just a very short recap. At the bottom of the layered stack, if you recall, we had an image which we removed the lock of. We added canvas, which is the transparent area you can see around the shot of the wheel. We have the layer we created for the drop shadow to give us that matte effect. And finally on the top, we've got a pure white frame in our case here, but that is what we're going to change. One of the first things we can do is to go to the top layer and we can preserve the transparent pixels. If we just look at that top layer isolated from the other two, if I wanted to flood that with colour, it's going to flood the entire canvas, and I just want to flood the pixels that are currently there. So if we click the lock at the top left of the layers, that protects that transparent centre. I'll turn on the drop shadow, and now you can see the effect of that nicely, and finally the image. What I want on the top here, I want to clone or sample a colour from the image. I'm going to sample a colour from the wheel, one of the warm colours. So we need to go over to the toolbox to the colour sampler. Now the colour sampler can work in a number of different ways, but whatever way we choose is going to meet our needs here. What I mean is, when we select the eyedropper tool, from the top left of the screen we can choose to just pick up one pixel and change the colour in our colour picker. We can take an average of 3 by 3 pixels, 5 by 5, 11 by 11. To be honest, most of these are going to meet our needs, if not all of them. But as an average, I'll stay with 5 by 5. There's the eyedropper tool. I want to move on to the warm tone, and I'm going to click to create it. There you can see it appear in the foreground of the colour picker. So looking up at the layers to remind ourselves that yes, we have locked the transparent pixels, Alt backspace will flood that frame with colour. Yes, I know what you're about to say. Wow, isn't that a bit bright? Yes, way too bright. We'll adjust it in a moment. Now the other colour I'd like to select is one of the neutral greys from the image. So I'm going to click around and pick up something fairly dark. We never know when we select these colours if they're right. It's not until we get them all together and we can view them with the image, then we can make the change. It's much easier, I think, when we can see them in relation to the image we're presenting. But as you can see in the foreground of my colour picker, I have picked up a grey. It looks as though it may be a little bit too light for me, but we'll soon see. What I'm going to do is to go over to my layers here, because what we're going to do is to select this layer. We're going to make a selection of the size of that frame. If I hold my control key and click, you can see Photoshop very easily selects the frame. But I don't want to put a gradient over the top of this layer. It makes more sense to go down to the bottom of the screen and create a new blank layer. We'll put any gradients on this layer. That way, if we don't feel we've got them quite right, we can drop the layer in the bin and have another go. Now I need to take you way back over to the left side of the screen again, back to the toolbox, because the tool I want next is my gradient tool down here. When I select the gradient tool, we need to look up at the top of the screen. We've got 5 options here. The one that I use for 99% of the time is this one. It's called a linear gradient, and from this drop down window here, what I need to choose is foreground to transparent. So the gradient we're going to make is using the colour we just sampled, that mid grey, but it's going to form a gradient but it will be transparent at the other end. I think the best thing to do is to show you what it's going to do. So I'm moving my cursor up to the center top of my frame. I'm going to click and drag down about a third of the way. There you can see how that gradient is affecting the frame. Straight away I think I'd like to come down a bit further. So I'll go back to the top and I'll have another go, and I'll just drag my line down a little more. There you can see it. We can do this as many times as we like because I only want a hint of colour in the centre. Now I'd like to put a gradient on the bottom of the frame too. Should I put this gradient on the layer I'm currently working on here, or should I create a new one? Well, it's really up to you, but the safer way is just create another blank layer. We'll go back down to the bottom here, click and drag upwards, much the same as we did at the top. There I have my mount, which is in harmony with the image, but maybe it needs one or two little embellishments. Control D will remove that selection, but just before I do, looking down at the bottom here on the inside edge of my frame, it's looking a little bit too pink for me, so I'm going to adjust the gradient. I've still got all the settings in place, I've still got the tool selected. Now when we draw a line to create the gradient, the line or the gradient starts solid grey at one end, but it merges into a transparency. So if I wanted the bottom part of my frame solid grey, I can start the gradient just inside there. So when I drag it up, I do know that I'm going to get solid grey right the way down there, and I think that's looking a little better. So now I'm happy to hit Control D. What I'd like to do first is to adjust the colour of the pink that I selected from the wheel. So I'm going to select that particular layer. If you go up to your image menu at the top left of the screen, you'll find your hue and saturation, but there really is a very quick shortcut, Control U. I'll drop this in the center of the frame because what I want to do here is take some saturation off that. I want it to be quite delicate, maybe even a little darker. Now I'm going to switch to the grey frame. I'll do the same here. Maybe I'll bring up my levels, which amounts to the same thing. Control L. I'm just going to darken that bottom gradient just a little bit. And you can see now why I've got these on two separate layers, because I can select the top gradient, and if I wanted to add the same sort of effect, either greater or slightly less, then I can do so. There we have our delicate frame. I think this may even need to come down just a little more, so Control U. This is why I always say it's best to save this as a Photoshop file, retaining all of these layers, so you can actually work on this on one day and make your evaluation the next. But let's assume we've done that and we're happy with the work we've done so far. Holding the Control key, I can select the three layers now that form our frame, right click and choose to merge them. Now we can think about any fine lines and any textures. Now, as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, I've gone ahead and added a 10 pixel Gaussian monochrome noise to the frame and a very thin line using the effects in the layers as we demonstrated in previous videos. Now, with the spinning round of the screen, here's another example where I've used exactly the same technique. You can see the image is made up in exactly the same way. The warm tone in the center of the frame, and of course you could reverse these colors, but I think it looks marginally better when the darker colors are at the top and bottom. But I sampled a color from the tail of the bird. It doesn't look very strong in color, but it was strong enough to give us that warm tone. And the blue was sampled from the water, but once again I found the need to just temper those colors with hue and saturation, and here you can see I've got some noise added but also a texture. If I just zoom in a little bit, there you can see that texture nicely. Over the years I've had quite a number of large prints printed and mounted for demonstration purposes. When I lived in the UK, my printer of choice was Loxley Colour from Scotland. Always they did a superb job. But I used to send them the artwork just as you're seeing it here. I would flatten those three together, but I would send the image and the border and just ask for the image to be printed and flush mounted. So when I took my images to a camera club to a demonstration, they're already framed without having the weight of a wooden frame and glass. But nevertheless, I've got my image framed. As I am recording this video, I'm not entirely sure at this stage whether it's going to end up on YouTube or not. But if you do happen to be watching this on YouTube, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit the notification bell so you're informed when I put up new content. These days we're viewing our images more and more on PC monitors, laptops, large flat screen TVs and also mobile devices. There are so many ways we can present our images, we're just scratching the surface here.